RDR stands for the Retail Distribution Review, and it's a process that started about 8 years ago when the FSA looked at the market and thought that the market was uneven in that there was a lot of product bias, a lot of product provider bias, churn risk, and various other elements that it wanted to get rid of. And so what it did is it decided to make a formal break between the manufacturer and the distributor to remove any bias between the two. So that's essentially what RDR is. It took about 8 years to work through all the many permutations and come up with a draft guide, a drafting that was acceptable to everyone. It was a slow start because in the beginning when the FCA decided, or the FSA as it was then called, decided that it was going to bring in RDR, the reaction from the industry was typically bad. People reacted badly. And rather than working closely with the regulator, what they did was stand on the sidelines and complained. And so the complaining really slowed the process down, and it took longer to achieve certain results. And it also meant that some things, weren't as refined as they should have been. And one clear point is the advisor gap that we have in the advice gap that we have in the UK, because we didn't go back really. Industry stakeholders really didn't go back with sufficient solutions and ideas of how to look after the mainstream client base, and that's why we have an advice gap. I think there's a lot of lessons and messages in our report, but we'd like to synthesize that down to just 2 or 3 key messages. And I think the first one has to be that regulation is not always a threat, it is also an opportunity. We've seen that in the UK with the recent advice guidance that came out explaining the boundaries between information, guidance and advice, which has resulted in several distributors coming forward with new propositions that they're going to launch. So I think the message is that regulation is often an opportunity and not just a threat. The second key message that I want to give people is that to remind them that if you engage positively with the regulator, you're much more likely to influence the overall direction of travel and the outcomes. If you stand on the sidelines and rail and complain and tell the regulator that he's got it wrong and this is the way it's always been done, then the regulator is much more likely to see himself as a consumer champion and see the distributor and the manufacturer as having vested interests. So don't put them in that situation. Work with them and influence the outcome. And the third point, I think, is again for the regulator, is about the issue of uneven playing fields and the dangers of focusing on one part of the market and not considering the rest of the market, the adjacent markets, the bits that are out of scope. So we would say that it is important to plan and consider the implications, frame your legislation quickly and implement it efficiently.